What if Michael Jordan's greatest challenge didn't happen on the court? Behind the spotlight, NBA championships, and the billions he amassed, a silent battle was being fought, one that no game strategy could ever fix. Imagine finding out that someone who shaped your entire life was dying quietly, refusing to ask for help even when they could no longer afford their own medication. What would you do if that person was your own sister? The one who held your hand before you ever became Michael Jordan? This is the story the media never told. How the man who conquered the world of sports had to devise a plan more complex than any basketball play to save someone who refused to be saved. A secret operation involving millions of dollars, fake identities, and an impossible mission to help without being discovered. After all, what happens when the world's greatest competitor finds out his sister is counting coins to buy medicine while he's signing multi-million-dollar deals? The answer will change everything you think you know about success, family, and the true meaning of strength. Autumn in Charlotte carried with it the familiar energy that preceded each NBA season. Michael Jordan's office at the Spectrum Center, home of the Charlotte Hornets, exuded understated luxury, with carefully selected memorabilia reflecting not only his 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls, but also his transition from basketball icon to businessman and franchise owner. Through the wide windows, golden leaves contrasted against North Carolina's deep blue sky, while Michael, dressed in a perfectly tailored Italian suit, reviewed the latest contracts for the upcoming season. His hands, which once seemed to float through the air during his famous dunks, now slid over legal documents with the same focused intensity that had made him legendary on the court. These terms need to be renegotiated before the preseason starts. We can't compromise the future of the franchise for a rushed decision in the present, he muttered to himself, jotting down notes in the margins with the same precision he once demonstrated in his game-winning shots. Amid salary figures and contractual clauses, Michael occasionally allowed himself a pause to reflect on the path he had taken. From the boy in Wilmington, who had been cut from the high school basketball team, to the man who redefined the sport and built a billion-dollar empire. Nike Air Jordan had transformed a product into a cultural phenomenon. His investments had expanded into multiple industries, and now the Hornets represented his ongoing connection to the game that had always defined his identity. The office's silence was occasionally interrupted only by the clinking of ice in his glass of water and the muffled sound of staff in the hallways, all careful not to disturb the legendary focus of his airness. Lost in thought, Michael barely noticed the afternoon sun dipping lower on the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the polished wood floor. Time moves differently on this side of the business. On the court, every second was an eternity. Here, the days just vanish while you're not looking, he reflected, rubbing his tired eyes. The intercom on his desk sounded softly, the polite voice of Patricia, his executive assistant for over a decade, breaking his concentration. Michael frowned. His schedule had been meticulously arranged to allow a few uninterrupted hours to review these contracts before his next meeting with the team executives. Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you asked not to be disturbed, but there's a woman here insisting on seeing you. She says it's about your sister Dolores and that it's urgent. The mention of his sister's name made Michael straighten in his chair, lines of concern instantly forming on his forehead. Family had always been the foundation of everything he had built, with his mother Dolores and his father James, instilling the principles of hard work and perseverance that had defined him, and his siblings sharing in the extraordinary journey his life had become. Send her in immediately, Patricia, and please postpone all appointments for the rest of the afternoon, he replied, his normally controlled voice now carrying a trace of apprehension that he rarely allowed to show in professional settings. Moments later, the heavy oak door opened to reveal a middle-aged African-American woman, conservatively dressed in a navy blue suit, clutching a folder tightly against her chest like a shield. Her eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses revealed the nervousness that her attempts at professional composure couldn't completely mask. Michael stood, his imposing height filling the space, but his usually unreadable face now showed genuine concern. The woman hesitated briefly before accepting Michael's gesture to sit in one of the leather armchairs across from his desk. I'm Cassandra Jenkins, coordinator of the Hope in Schools program founded by your sister. I've never involved myself in family matters before, but extreme circumstances call for extreme measures. I've spent the last 2 days trying to convince myself not to come here, Mr. Jordan, she confessed, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the folder on her lap. Michael stepped around the imposing desk, choosing to sit in the armchair beside her instead of maintaining the formal barrier between them. His instincts told him that whatever had brought this evidently uncomfortable woman into his office was not a matter for professional distance. Cassandra took a deep breath, as if preparing to plunge into icy waters. Her eyes met Michael's, and he saw there the same determination he recognized in dedicated educators, people whose commitment to their causes transcended personal comfort and convenience. The silence between them seemed to stretch for minutes, though it was only seconds. Mr. Jordan, I would never do this if it weren't urgent. Your sister is very ill, but she refuses to stop working or seek proper treatment, Cassandra finally said, the words coming out in an almost continuous flow, as if she had rehearsed the sentence repeatedly on her way there. She would forbid me from being here if she knew. She'll probably fire me when she finds out. But some things are more important than jobs, she added, a surprising firmness now replacing her initial nervousness. The words hit Michael like a physical blow, the same sensation he'd felt as a teenager when he got the news of his father James's murder. For a moment, the man who controlled every aspect of his own narrative on the court, in business, in the media, felt completely disoriented. His mind quickly calculated how long it had been since his last conversation with Dolores. Weeks? No, months. Since the last charity event for the Jordan Family Foundation in the spring, when they had briefly met surrounded by donors and cameras. Guilt hit him like a wave, something he, with his relentless work ethic and preparation, rarely allowed into his life. What kind of illness? Since when? Why am I hearing this from you and not from her or another family member? The questions came out in rapid succession, his tone sharper than he intended, a reflection of shock rather than accusation. I don't understand. Dolores was always the organized one, the sensible one. She practically raised all of us while our parents worked. How could she neglect her own health like this? He asked, running a hand over his short hair in a rare gesture of confusion. Cassandra opened her folder, pulling out some meticulously organized papers. Even in this crisis moment, the analytical part of Michael's brain noticed the level of preparation this woman had. She came with documentation, an approach he himself would have taken. Severe autoimmune disease affecting multiple organs, diagnosed approximately 8 months ago. Doctors recommended immediate treatment and a drastic reduction in stressful activities and travel, she explained, handing Michael a medical report with technical terms highlighted in yellow. Dolores signed this document acknowledging the risks of delaying treatment, but she kept her regular schedule. Every week, she travels to underserved communities throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, giving motivational talks at underfunded public schools, organizing mentorship programs for at-risk students. Our team is small, and she took on even more responsibility when funding began to drop. Cassandra hesitated, then added in a lower voice, last week, she fainted during a speech at a school in West Philadelphia. The children were terrified, but she insisted it was just exhaustion and continued the program after only 15 minutes of rest. Michael absorbed each word like successive blows, his usually unreadable expression now a visible portrait of emotional conflict. Images from his childhood flooded his mind. Dolores, only a few years older, helping him with homework while their parents worked double shifts. Dolores cheering wildly from nearly empty bleachers at his early games, long before worldwide fame. Dolores, always a steady anchor of reason when the world started treating him like something between a god and a commodity. She was more than just his sister. She was one of the few human beings on earth who knew him simply as Mike before he became Michael Jordan. Something shifted in his gaze, a resolve forming behind the initial shock. As the program coordinator, you must have access to the finances. Why can't she afford the medication? That doesn't make sense. Our family has more than enough resources. His voice now carried an analytical tone, the same one he used when dissecting game strategies or complex business contracts. There must be some misunderstanding. Dolores knows she can count on me or any of our siblings for anything. Cassandra seemed to have anticipated this question. Without hesitation, she pulled out a thin folder marked Hope in Schools and slid it across the desk toward Michael. When donations began to drop last year due to the recession, Dolores started covering operational costs with her personal savings. Then, with medical bills piling up after the diagnosis, she had to make impossible choices, Cassandra explained, opening the folder to reveal meticulously organized financial statements. The program serves children in some of the most violent and desperately poor communities in the eastern part of the country. When the school in Kensington was about to lose its after-school meal program, Dolores redirected the money she had set aside for her treatment. When 3 promising students were about to drop out of the mentorship program because their families could no longer afford transportation, she quietly canceled her health plan and used the funds to ensure they could continue. Cassandra's voice cracked slightly. Last week, after the fainting episode, I found unfilled prescriptions in her purse. Medications she couldn't afford because she redirected every dollar to keep our programs in struggling neighborhoods running. A heavy silence filled the office as Michael took it all in, his analytical mind processing every detail while his heart wrestled with conflicting emotions. Pride in his sister's selflessness, anger at her stubbornness, and overwhelming guilt for being so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't noticed what was happening to someone so vital in his life. Outside, the Charlotte sky was turning orange with sunset, in stark contrast to the emotional storm inside the office. The idea of Dolores, his own sister, someone with the Jordan name, counting coins for medication while he signed million-dollar contracts was unbearable. "Why didn't she come to me?" he finally asked, his voice choked with emotion that few outside his family had ever witnessed. The question lingered in the air between them, laden with decades of family history and complexities that no outsider could fully comprehend. "We are family. I would have fixed everything immediately. How could she hide this? After everything we've been through together, how could she think she couldn't trust me with this?" Cassandra appeared to carefully weigh her response, aware that she was treading into deep and complicated familial waters. "She didn't want to be a burden to anyone, especially you. On the rare occasions she talks about it, she says you already carry the weight of a global legacy," Cassandra replied softly, choosing her words carefully. "There's something else she often says when she talks about your family. Something about how your parents taught you all that character is revealed when no one is watching, and that helping others is never optional. It's simply what you do." Last week, when I convinced her to at least consider cutting back her schedule, she said something that stayed with me. "Millions of children look at Michael and see possibilities they never imagined before. If I can get just a few dozen to see the same in themselves, my life will have been worth it." Cassandra paused, then added, almost as if speaking to herself, "I think for her, asking for help would be admitting she can't carry out the same mission she sees you fulfilling on a global scale." Michael stood up abruptly, walking over to the window, his silhouette outlined against the evening sky, hands clasped tightly behind his back. A posture those who had worked closely with him would recognize as a sign of deep strategic contemplation. For long moments he remained like that, seemingly studying the city skyline, but in truth reliving an entire lifetime of moments with his sister, from childhood games on the streets of Wilmington to adult conversations about purpose and legacy. When he finally turned around, his eyes carried the same intensity that opponents on the court had learned to fear, now directed toward an entirely different challenge. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Jenkins. You've shown more loyalty to my sister today than I have in the past few months," he said, his voice now perfectly controlled, the brief moment of vulnerability sealed and locked away. "I'm going to need every detail you can provide. Her complete schedule for the coming weeks, addresses where she's staying, names of her doctors, every detail of her medical condition, every cent she needs for proper treatment." Michael returned to his desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a leather-bound notepad, something as anachronistic as it was effective for a man who had always preferred to rely on his own memory and handwritten notes, rather than digital assistance. "But more important than any practical detail, I need to understand exactly how to help her without her realizing I'm involved. Because if there's one thing I know about Dolores Jordan, it's that her pride is as big as mine." As the sun set over Charlotte, a silent mission was being forged inside that office. Michael Jordan, the man who had built his legend overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles, now faced perhaps his most complex challenge yet: saving someone who didn't want to be saved, without her even knowing she was being helped. On the court, all his victories had been won under the spotlight and applause of the world. This battle, however, would require something entirely different: a win in the shadows, invisible to everyone, especially the person who mattered most. Dolores would never forgive me if she found out I'm interfering. But some things are more important than forgiveness, he murmured, more to himself than to Cassandra. She took care of all of us when we were kids. Now it's my turn to take care of her, whether she wants it or not. The gray autumn morning in Pennsylvania contrasted dramatically with the controlled environment Michael had left behind in Charlotte. The private jet that usually bore his logo remained on the private runway. Instead, a commercial flight had brought him to Philadelphia under a false name, booked by his most trusted personal assistant under strict instructions for absolute discretion. At the airport, Michael declined any car service and went directly to a regular rental agency, where he selected a silver Ford Fusion, anonymous, discreet, the kind of vehicle no one would associate with the man whose face had once graced billboards the size of buildings. As he adjusted the driver's seat to accommodate his long legs, conflicting thoughts flooded his mind. I never imagined I'd be hiding my identity to spy on my own sister. If someone had told this story at our dinner table years ago, Mom would have said we were watching too much television, he muttered to himself, a sad smile playing on his lips as he put on a faded Phillies cap and sunglasses that looked more suited to a random tourist than a billionaire. The address provided by Cassandra Jenkins led him to a modest suburb on the outskirts of Philadelphia, far from the revitalized and gentrified areas. Michael parked 2 blocks away from a small brick commercial building, its faded sign identifying it as the headquarters of the Hope in Schools program. The car's digital clock read 6:40 a.m. when he spotted a white van, visibly worn from use, parked in front of the building. From his vantage point, Michael could clearly see the building's main door, pulling his cap lower over his eyes as he waited. The wait wasn't long. Precisely at 7 o'clock, the building's door opened. The figure that emerged made his heart tighten. Dolores, his older sister, had always been a woman of commanding presence, not just because of the trademark Jordan height, but because of the vibrant energy that seemed to radiate from her. The person now walking toward the van was a diminished version of that memory, noticeably thinner, her face marked by deep dark circles that were visible even from a distance. My God, Dolores, what are you doing to yourself? How did I not notice this happening right under my nose? Michael whispered, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly the knuckles turned white. Watching Dolores load heavy boxes of school supplies into the van, dragging herself with visible physical strain, felt like a cruel punishment designed specifically to torment him. Each of her movements revealed a weakened body struggling to maintain the dignity and strength that had always defined her. Michael instinctively moved several times to get out of the car and help her, only to force himself to stay put, reminding himself of the purpose behind his secret mission. The man who fought for every possession on the court with legendary ferocity, who turned every challenge into fuel for his greatness, now felt completely powerless. When Dolores finally got into the van after loading the last box, Michael noticed how she had to pause for a moment, breathing deeply with her eyes closed before starting the engine. She was always the strongest of us all, the anchor Mom and Dad relied on to keep everything running. Seeing her like this, it's like the world has turned completely upside down, he reflected, a wave of emotion threatening his carefully maintained composure. Following Dolores's van through Philadelphia's suburbs to one of the city's most rundown neighborhoods was a journey into a world Michael had only known in theory, the kind of community his philanthropic initiatives aimed to help, but that he rarely witnessed personally. The school Dolores drove to looked more like a fortress than an educational institution. Windows protected by bars, walls covered in graffiti, the front yard devoid of any vegetation or color. Michael parked across the street, watching as Dolores methodically unloaded the supplies, refusing help from a security guard who offered assistance. She walked deliberately slowly, like someone who knew precisely how much effort her body could handle before giving out. Through his dark lenses, Michael observed the familiar determination on his sister's face, so similar to the one he himself had displayed countless times, playing through injuries that would have sent other players straight to the operating table. We're more alike than we ever admitted, aren't we? Both willing to destroy our bodies for what we believe in, incapable of accepting limits or compromises, he thought, a mixture of admiration and despair swelling in his chest. Using decades of experience navigating public situations without being recognized, Michael managed to enter the school auditorium and discreetly position himself at the back, blending in with maintenance staff and early arriving parents. The room gradually filled with noisy teenagers, many wearing t-shirts and caps bearing his own logo, a surreal reminder of the distance between the worlds he and his sister inhabited, despite both technically being in the same physical space. Dolores stepped onto the small stage without a formal introduction, her presence immediately capturing the attention of the restless youth. Michael watched, fascinated, as his sister underwent an almost magical transformation before his eyes. Her evidently exhausted body seemed to channel some secret reserve of energy, her voice finding strength and resonance as she addressed the students. "You see me here today, but you don't see the journey that brought me to this stage," she began, each word clear and measured. "Some of you might think your current circumstances define who you are or who you can become. Let me tell you something I learned from my own mother, who cleaned other people's houses so her children could have opportunities. It doesn't matter where you come from, but where you're going." Dolores' speech transcended the typical motivational talk. There was something almost sacred in the way she connected with every young person in the room, as if she were having 100 individual conversations simultaneously. Michael, who had witnessed the greatest sports and political speakers in action, found himself completely captivated. Occasionally, her voice faltered briefly, or her hands trembled while emphasizing a point, signs of the illness quietly attacking her body. Still, her spirit and charisma remained unshaken. She spoke of resilience not as an abstract concept, but as a daily practice. The conscious decision to keep going when all circumstances invite surrender. From his spot in the shadows, Michael recognized stories he himself had lived, now reframed to inspire a new generation with no mention of his name or fame. This wasn't a speech about the exceptionalism of the Jordans. It was about the universality of human potential. When a young man in the back of the room asked how she stayed so positive despite everything happening in the neighborhood, Dolores smiled gently. "Because giving up is a luxury none of us can afford. Each morning brings a new opportunity to rewrite the story the world tries to tell about you. The secret is refusing to let yesterday decide what you'll do today." After the formal speech, Michael stayed to watch, even more impressed by what followed. Instead of retreating to rest, as her body clearly needed, Dolores remained in the now empty auditorium with a smaller group of students, some apparently designated as class leaders, others visibly in need of individual attention. What struck Michael was not only her dedication, but the genuine intimacy she demonstrated. She knew each teenager by name, asked about younger siblings, sick grandparents, recent tests, not as a social formality, but with the sincere interest of someone who truly memorizes the personal stories of those she serves. When one girl mentioned receiving a low grade in math, Dolores immediately rearranged her schedule in a worn-out notebook. "Mariana, I'll arrive an hour early on Thursday so we can work on the equations before class. Bring your exercises, and we'll see exactly where the difficulties are," she promised, her hand visibly trembling as she wrote the reminder. "Tell your grandmother I'm still waiting for that feijoada recipe," she promised. "Tell her it's a fair trade, math lessons for Brazilian cooking." When Dolores finally left the school, it was already past 3 p.m. She had gone all day without a lunch break, surviving on just a cereal bar and water during a brief transition between activities. Michael followed the van at a safe distance, the knot in his stomach tightening when he realized she was heading toward a modest commercial area. The pharmacy she approached had the worn charm of a family-run establishment, bravely resisting the giant pharmaceutical chains. Michael parked across the street, watching Dolores walk slowly inside, her posture now revealing the exhaustion she had so skillfully masked all day. After a few minutes of internal deliberation, he decided to take a chance. Adjusting his disguise, he entered the pharmacy, maintaining a strategic distance from his sister while pretending to examine vitamins on a shelf near the prescription counter. What he witnessed in the next few minutes would be etched into his memory with the same clarity as his most triumphant moments on the court. Dolores stood in line at the counter, carefully removing a glass jar from her worn bag, the kind of container usually used to store coins gathered from a bedside table. With unwavering dignity, she began meticulously counting coins onto the counter, while the pharmacist, an older man with a compassionate expression, waited patiently. "I'll take only half the pills today," Michael heard his sister say, her voice low but perfectly audible in the quiet, nearly empty pharmacy. "I need to stretch it until the next payment. The doctor said I can alternate them every other day without completely compromising the treatment." The pharmacist, clearly familiar with Dolores, frowned with genuine concern. "Mrs. Jordan, we've talked about this. These medications weren't designed to be taken every other day. The treatment's effectiveness depends on consistent levels in your system," he explained, leaning over the counter and lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Let me check again if we can enroll you in some assistance program. Or maybe we can work with generics for some of the medications." Michael watched as his sister, the same woman who had commanded a room full of teenagers with magnetic authority just hours earlier, now shook her head with weary resignation. "We've already tried all those options, Mr. Phillips. The primary medications don't have approved generics yet, and the organization's income disqualifies me from most assistance programs, even though I personally can barely afford my apartment rent." She slid a prescription across the counter. "Please, just half the dose of Amorin and Plaquenil this week. I promise that next month, when we receive the municipal grant payment, I'll return to the full dosage." The pharmacist hesitated, clearly conflicted, before reluctantly nodding. "I'll prepare it, but please consult your doctor before your next visit. He needs to know you're modifying the regimen on your own." Back in the rental car, Michael finally allowed the facade of control he had maintained throughout the day to completely crumble. The tears came silently at first, then in sobs that shook his entire body, the kind of deep cry he hadn't experienced since receiving the news of his father's murder. This moment of absolute vulnerability, witnessed only by the worn upholstery of an anonymous Ford Fusion, contained layers of emotion that went far beyond the immediate concern for Dolores's health. It was the devastating recognition of how the paths of two siblings, born of the same parents, raised with the same values, could diverge so dramatically. While his bank account accumulated millions that he could never spend in multiple lifetimes, his own sister was counting coins for essential medication. The bitter irony was not lost on him: how much money consumers had spent on products bearing his name and image, while the woman who had helped shape him as a person sacrificed her own health to serve children in forgotten neighborhoods. "What kind of world have we built, Dad?" he whispered, as if James Jordan could somehow offer wisdom from beyond. "One where I can buy islands while Dolores can't buy medicine? This can't be what you and Mom imagined for us." As the sun began to set over Philadelphia, Michael remained still in the car, processing everything he had witnessed. Through discreet investigations conducted by his team, he already knew that Dolores had canceled her health insurance to pay for the nonprofit's headquarters rent when donations dropped during the economic recession. He knew from documents provided by Cassandra that his sister had sold her modest home for a tiny apartment to redirect the difference to scholarships for promising students. But knowing these facts intellectually was completely different from personally witnessing the consequences of these choices. Michael had always prided himself on his ability to visualize complete strategies, in basketball, in business, in life. Now a strategy began to form in his mind, as crystal clear and defined as the ones he had conceived on the court. This would not be a direct intervention, a check handed with grandiose declarations of brotherly concern. Knowing Dolores, such an approach would be met with fierce resistance and even resentment. No, this would require the same surgical precision and subtlety that defined his most famous moves. "This extraordinary woman, who has inspired me my whole life, isn't asking for help. She's literally sacrificing her health and life to continue serving others," he murmured to himself, drying the last traces of tears. "So I'll help her exactly the way she helps others, in a way that preserves her dignity and purpose." The drive back to the anonymous hotel where he had stayed passed in a blur of accelerated thoughts and renewed determination. Michael Jordan, known worldwide for his refusal to accept defeat, for turning every obstacle into fuel for greatness, now channeled that same relentless energy into a cause far more personal than any championship. As he drove through the night streets of Philadelphia, a plan began to take shape in his mind. Complex, confidential, and absolutely necessary. This would be an operation requiring the same precision as his game-winning shots, the same peripheral vision that allowed him to see plays before they materialized. Dolores always taught us that true character shows when no one is looking, he reflected, a new purpose solidifying in his determination. I'll help her in a way that she'll never know it was me, because it's not about me receiving credit or gratitude. It's about her being able to continue her work without sacrificing her own life in the process. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Michael's private office in Charlotte, illuminating a conference table usually reserved for multi-million-dollar contract negotiations and marketing strategies. Today, however, the purpose was infinitely more personal. Michael had spent the entire night preparing detailed notes, combing through financial and medical data, and getting ready for the meeting with the same meticulous intensity he had applied to his legendary early morning workouts. Sitting at the table were only three people: David Falk, his longtime financial advisor and agent, whose loyalty dated back to the early days of his career; Dr. Catherine Westmoreland, a world-renowned autoimmune disease specialist, discreetly brought in from Boston under a strict confidentiality agreement; and Marcus Williams, the discreet director of the Jordan Family Foundation, who had silently overseen millions in philanthropic donations over decades. Michael remained standing, unable to contain the nervous energy coursing through his body as he detailed what he had witnessed in Pennsylvania. What I'm about to ask of you goes beyond your professional responsibilities. This is personal, confidential, and absolutely crucial. No one outside of the four of us can know what we discuss in this room. Not even other members of my family, especially my sister Dolores. She would die of embarrassment if she knew I was involved, he explained, his voice carrying an intensity rarely shown outside the court. We need to help her in a way that preserves her dignity and doesn't make her feel like a charity case. Any suggestion that doesn't meet that criterion is automatically off the table. David Falk, who had known Michael when he was just a promising prospect coming out of North Carolina, leaned forward with his hands clasped on the table. His expression revealed an understanding that went beyond the professional. He had known Dolores, witnessed the Jordan family dynamic from the very beginning. Michael, let's consider the facts objectively. Your sister needs medical treatment she can't afford. Your organization needs funding to continue operating, and you need absolute anonymity in any assistance. It sounds simple, but we know it's not, he began, opening a file with financial documents already discreetly requested. Dolores would categorically refuse direct help from you. That's clear from the fact that she hasn't asked for assistance despite her desperate situation. But people like your sister, who dedicate their lives to greater causes, often accept resources when they believe it will benefit the institution primarily, not themselves. Falk paused, watching Michael's reaction before continuing. We also need to consider the psychological complexity here. Dolores doesn't see herself as someone in need of charity. She sees herself as a provider, mentor, leader. Any solution will need to honor that self-perception, while also protecting her health and future. It's like that time in Barcelona, remember? When you had pneumonia before the game against Croatia, but refused to admit you were sick because the team needed you. We need to play for the Dolores she is, not the Dolores we wish would be more reasonable about her own well-being. Dr. Westmoreland, who had been silently reviewing Dolores' partial medical records obtained discreetly, adjusted her thin-frame glasses and entered the discussion with the clinical precision that had made her one of the most sought-after specialists in the country. Her slender fingers flipped through pages of lab results and prescriptions, like a conductor studying a complex score. Your sister's autoimmune condition is treatable, Mr. Jordan, but not without consistent and comprehensive medical intervention. The medications she is taking, or should be taking properly, are just the tip of the iceberg, she explained, with the seriousness of someone who understands the gravity of the situation beyond the numbers on spreadsheets. From the documentation, we are dealing with a combination of lupus and moderate rheumatoid arthritis, possibly exacerbated by chronic stress and likely neglect of proper nutrition. The protocol she should follow includes immunosuppressants, specific anti-inflammatories, and regular monitoring of renal and liver function. To make an analogy that might make sense to you, it's like a team playing without substitutes, no medical team, and with inadequate equipment against an opponent who never tires. Eventually, collapse is inevitable. The doctor looked directly at Michael without the hesitation or excessive deference that many people showed in his presence. If she continues with this pattern, we're talking about permanent damage to multiple organs within 8 to 12 months. However, with the proper treatment, your sister could not only stabilize her condition, but potentially regain much of her quality of life and energy. The central question is, how can we make this happen without triggering the pride alarm that clearly prevents her from seeking help? Marcus Williams, the man responsible for turning Michael's philanthropic intentions into tangible impact for over 15 years, had remained silent until then, meticulously documenting every word in a black leather notebook. Now he placed his pen on the table and interlaced his fingers thoughtfully. His knowledge of nonprofit organizational structures and funding mechanisms was precisely the type of expertise needed. I've been researching Hope in Schools since our initial conversation, Michael. I've built a complete profile of the organization, he began, his calm voice carrying the confidence of someone who had navigated complex scenarios countless times. It's a small operation, but extraordinarily efficient. They make a disproportionate impact considering their limited resources. We've identified 3 critical needs. First, financial stability for the organization. Second, access to quality medical care for Dolores. Third, long-term sustainability without her continued intervention. Williams opened his laptop, showing comparative efficiency charts between similar organizations. What impresses me is that even with such limited resources, they keep administrative costs below 8%, practically a miracle in the nonprofit sector. This confirms what you've always said about your sister. She turns every dollar into maximum impact, even at the cost of her own salary and well-being. She doesn't just need money, Michael. She needs a structure that supports her work while taking care of her without her realizing she's being taken care of. We need to create a solution as elegant and discreet as a no-look pass on a fast break. Michael walked slowly to the window, contemplating the Charlotte skyline as he absorbed the perspectives presented. Behind him, the 3 professionals waited in respectful silence, understanding that beyond the global icon, this was a brother dealing with deeply human emotions. When he finally turned, his expression revealed the same unshakable determination that had made opponents back down on the courts. We're going to create a new foundation, completely anonymous, called Educators Who Inspire. The official purpose will be to identify and support educational leaders with health issues, enabling them to continue their transformative work while receiving necessary treatments, he declared, his words flowing with growing conviction as the plan solidified in his mind. Marcus, I want multiple layers of legal protection to ensure my name is never associated with this initiative. Use different firms for incorporation, asset management, and operations. David established an initial endowment of $10 million, channeled through that structure in the Cayman Islands we use for private investments. Dr. Westmoreland, I'll need you to coordinate with your network of specialists on an innovative research program focused specifically on the type of condition my sister faces. Michael paused, his eyes shining with the same intensity he displayed in the decisive moments of crucial games. Every element must appear completely legitimate and independent under scrutiny. If Dolores or anyone else investigates, they will find only reputable institutions doing meaningful work. This is not just about helping my sister, it's about creating a system that can eventually help other educators in the same situation. I can't imagine she's the only one sacrificing health for vocation. Will turn my pain watching her suffer into a legacy that will continue long after this immediate situation. In the following days, Michael's private office became a command center for what they internally referred to as Project Phoenix, a name chosen by Marcus as a reference to the mythological bird that rises from its own ashes. Between encrypted calls, meetings with legal experts, and market research on real estate in the Philadelphia area, a meticulously detailed plan took shape. Michael, with decades of experience managing his public image while protecting his private life, was now applying this expertise to an entirely different purpose. During one of these sessions, while reviewing documents related to the headquarters of Dolores organization, David Falk made a surprising discovery. The building where Hope in Schools operates is about to go into foreclosure. The previous owner passed away, and the heirs raised the rent by 30%. Aware that nonprofits have little mobility due to community ties, he explained, sliding real estate reports across the table. Here's our first concrete opportunity. I can organize the silent purchase of this property through a tertiary subsidiary, completely restructuring the terms as a long-term grant with minimal payments. The official documents would show a community organization stabilization initiative acquiring the property as part of a broader neighborhood revitalization program. Legitimate, verifiable, and completely disconnected from you. Michael nodded slowly, recognizing the elegance of the solution. Make it happen immediately. Include structural improvements to the building. That place needs a new heating system and roof, although Dolores would probably never mention it. But keep the renovations modest. Anything ostentatious would raise suspicions. It should look exactly like the kind of investment a responsible community foundation would make. No more, no less. While the real estate operation advanced under David Falk's coordination, Dr. Westmoreland was developing the most delicate component of the plan, ensuring appropriate medical care for Dolores without raising suspicions. In a secure video conference, she presented her proposal to Michael and the small team. I reached out to colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. They are conducting advanced studies on treatments for autoimmune conditions, with protocols that would be perfectly suited to your sister's case, she explained, her face on the monitor showing the quiet confidence of true experts. I've structured a new research program funded by the newly created Educators Who Inspire Foundation, specifically focusing on the impact of autoimmune conditions on professionals under high levels of stress and community exposure. Educators, social workers, community nurses. The program will select 20 initial participants, offering free experimental treatment and monitoring at the region's top hospital. Michael leaned forward, his expression revealing concern. What if she refuses? Dolores has always been cautious about experimental treatments. The doctor smiled subtly. I anticipated that. The experiment is essentially the standard treatment protocol she should be receiving, with the addition of more intensive monitoring and some complementary therapies approved that are typically not covered by conventional health insurance. There is no additional risk, just carefully presented extra benefits as part of a legitimate scientific study. And the selection criteria will be meticulously designed so that she is an ideal candidate, but without appearing specifically targeted at her. We're talking about a genuinely valuable program that could exist independently of your sister, just structured to ensure she qualifies unquestionably. As each component of the plan solidified, Marcus Williams continued to discreetly investigate Dolores's personal financial situation, seeking to fully understand the scope of the sacrifice she had made for her mission. During one of the morning meetings, he presented his findings with evident professional admiration. Michael, we found something you need to know about your sister, something that exemplifies who she really is, he began, opening a folder with meticulously organized financial documents. Dolores had saved for years for a promising experimental treatment at a specialized clinic in Minnesota. It wasn't covered by any insurance plan, and it cost approximately $85,000. Marcus paused significantly, his eyes meeting Michael's. 3 months ago, she used all that money, every penny she had saved for her own treatment, to fund full scholarships for 3 students from an impoverished community in North Philadelphia. Extraordinary young talents, but without resources, who had gained acceptance to top universities, but wouldn't be able to attend without significant financial assistance. Marcus slid photographs of the 3 young people across the table: a 17-year-old Latina girl with a violin, an African-American boy holding a science award, and a young Asian girl with an advanced calculus book. She wrote the scholarship contracts in such a way that the recipients would never know the true source of the funding. They all believed they received anonymous scholarships based solely on academic merit. Upon hearing those words, Michael felt a wave of emotion pass through him. Pride, admiration, sadness, and frustration mixed in a whirlpool that he rarely allowed to surface so close to the surface. His hands instinctively reached for the gold pendant he carried with him, a gift his father had given him shortly before being murdered, containing the simple inscription, "Remember who you are." The room remained in respectful silence as Michael absorbed the magnitude of his sister's sacrifice. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a revealing hoarseness. "This is how she's always been," he said, visibly struggling to maintain composure. "Putting everyone before herself, just like Mom taught us, since we were kids in Wilmington, when she would give up her own lunch at school to make sure I and our siblings had enough to eat. Mom worked 3 jobs, but there were still tough days." Michael walked to the window again, his imposing silhouette framed against the morning light. "I remember once, when I was about 12 years old, Dolores won a contest at school, $100 for an essay on social justice. It was a significant amount for a teenager back then. We all assumed she would buy those shoes she had been wanting for months. Instead, she used the money to buy me a new suit. My first proper suit for a summer job interview I was nervous about. She said it was an investment in my future." Michael paused, breathing deeply. "Now she's investing in the education of strangers at the expense of her own life. This isn't just generosity, it's almost self-destruction, and I've been too busy with my own endeavors to notice." The emotional tension in the room was palpable as each member of the small team processed the implications of what they were discovering about Dolores Jordan. Marcus, who had worked with dozens of philanthropic organizations throughout his career, seemed genuinely impressed. "In all my years coordinating assistance in community development programs, I've rarely encountered someone with such a level of commitment," he commented, carefully collecting the documents. "This makes our mission even more important. We're not just saving your sister's life, Michael. We're preserving the work of someone who quietly transforms lives without seeking recognition or reward." It was David Falk who finally brought the discussion back to the practical plan, with the pragmatic objectivity that had made him one of the most respected negotiators in the sports world. "We honor Dolores not just with our admiration, but with effective action. Beyond the anonymous foundation, the real estate acquisition, and the medical program, we need to consider her personal financial life," he pointed out, opening a new folder. "I propose the establishment of an annual recognition scholarship for transformative educators, with a substantial monetary prize in addition to professional recognition. We'll structure the criteria in such a way that Dolores will inevitably qualify, but again, without any indication of specific targeting. This will allow for a legitimate and honorable stream of income that she can accept without compromising her integrity or dignity." As the initial phases of the plan began to materialize, Michael remained obsessively informed about every detail, frequently suggesting adjustments based on his intimate knowledge of his sister's personality. During one of these revisions, he identified a potential weak point. "Dolores is incredibly perceptive. She will question the coincidence of all these opportunities arising simultaneously," he warned, scribbling notes in his notebook. "We need to space out the initiatives, create a natural progression that won't raise suspicion. We start with the real estate issue, as it's the one most distant from her personally. Then the educational scholarship that validates her professional work. Only when she's comfortable with these developments do we introduce the medical program. And we need to anticipate her investigations. She will check the legitimacy of every organization, research every name associated, look for any possible connection to me or the Jordan family." Marcus nodded, appreciating the level of strategic detail. "We're already creating retroactive online presence for the Inspiring Educators Foundation, websites, annual reports from previous years, verifiable professional profiles for each member of the fictitious board. We're even planting small articles in niche educational publications dating back up to 18 months. If she looks, she'll find an apparently established organization with a verifiable history." The depth of deception required for this act of love left everyone uncomfortable. But the alternative, allowing Dolores to continue sacrificing her health, was unacceptable. "Let's proceed. But remember, any mistake could compromise the entire operation. Dolores needs to believe she deserves each opportunity on her own merits, not by external intervention," Michael concluded, his tone leaving no room for negligence or imprecision in execution. On the 10th day after the start of the Phoenix Project, the small team gathered for a final review before implementing the first phase. Michael's private office, normally immaculate, was now covered with diagrams, timelines, and detailed profiles of every person Dolores would interact with as part of the plan. To an outside observer, the scene would resemble the meticulous preparation for a decisive move in a championship final, an impression not far from the reality. Michael, who had only slept a few hours over the past nights, studied every detail with his characteristic intensity, ensuring that no element could be traced back to him. Dr. Westmoreland presented the selected doctors to treat Dolores, all top professionals, genuinely dedicated to researching autoimmune conditions, but also carefully vetted to ensure absolute discretion. David Falk confirmed that the building acquisition would be finalized that same afternoon, with documents already prepared to formalize the new subsidized rental agreement. Marcus presented the communication strategy for the gradual discovery of each new opportunity, ensuring it would appear natural and not orchestrated. When all the elements were finally aligned, Michael slowly walked around the room, observing the extraordinary work his team had accomplished in such a short time. "What we're doing here goes beyond helping my sister. We're honoring the example she's always represented for me," he declared, his vulnerability momentarily visible. "When I was young, everyone talked about my natural talent, my athletic ability. Few understood that it was Dolores who first taught me what true determination means, sacrifice for what you believe in. If we can accomplish even a fraction of what she did for me and our brothers, we will have done something meaningful." The high-quality cream-colored envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, stamped with an elegant and discreet logo from the newly established Inspiring Educators Initiative. Dolores Jordan found it along with the usual bills and organizational mail, initially mistaking it for another donation request or a brochure for an educational conference. Inside the modest office of Hope in Schools, she set it aside while dealing with more urgent matters: a leaking ceiling threatening to damage teaching materials, authorization forms for the next student field trip to the Science Museum, calls to parents about the after-school tutoring program. It was only later in the afternoon when the pain in her joints became more intense, and she took one of the few pills she had been able to buy that month, that Dolores finally opened the envelope. Her tired eyes scanned the contents of the official letter, initially with disinterest, then with growing skepticism. "Dear Mrs. Jordan," the document began, "we are pleased to inform you that after a rigorous selection process, you have been chosen as one of 20 finalists to participate in our special treatment program for educators with proven community impact." Dolores let out a dry, almost bitter laugh. "Wonderful, another opportunity that probably charges a $5,000 participation fee, as if I had money to buy my own medication, let alone participate in some exclusive educator treatment program." The next day, as Dolores organized materials for her upcoming lecture at a downtown school, Cassandra Jenkins entered her office visibly excited, holding the same envelope that Dolores had casually discarded on a pile of mail to be eventually answered. "Did you see this? It's that new program from the University of Pennsylvania that's been in all the educational publications in recent months. They're only accepting 20 educators from across the country, and you've been selected," Cassandra exclaimed, her genuine enthusiasm in stark contrast to Dolores' exhausted skepticism. Before Dolores could respond, Cassandra had already opened her tablet, showing reports, carefully planted by Marcus Williams and his team, about the revolutionary initiative combining advanced medical research with support for educators in vulnerable communities. "Look, here's Dr. Richard Bennett's profile, the medical director. He won the Harrison Award for Humanitarian Medical Research last year. And here's an interview with the first participant in the pilot program in Arizona. She had a condition similar to yours and went back to full-time work after just 4 months of treatment." Dolores adjusted her glasses, her interest reluctantly piqued by the abundance of seemingly legitimate information. Her academic training had always taught her to verify sources, and these seemed impeccable: dates, cross-references, verifiable testimonials. "Cassandra, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but programs like this usually have a significant cost that isn't made explicit in the promotional materials, or they require you to be away from your work for months, which simply isn't an option for me. You know very well we don't have anyone to replace my duties here." A week after the letter arrived, the office phone rang precisely at 9 a.m. Cassandra answered, her expression quickly transforming into respectful surprise. "Yes, Dr. Bennett. She's right here. One moment, please." Extending the phone to Dolores with wide eyes, she whispered, "It's the director of the treatment program." Dolores hesitated briefly before answering, her voice automatically assuming the professional tone she reserved for official interactions, no matter how badly she felt. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 30 minutes, during which the distinguished doctor, carefully instructed by Michael and his team, explained in convincing detail how the program had been specifically designed to allow educators to continue their essential work while receiving cutting-edge medical treatment. "Mrs. Jordan, let me be absolutely transparent," said the warm, authoritative voice on the other end of the line. "This program is entirely free for the selected participants. It is funded by a private endowment specifically meant to support educational leaders like you, whose contribution to their communities is inversely proportional to the resources at their disposal. We completely understand your hesitation. We often encounter initial resistance from exceptional educators precisely because they are so used to putting others' needs before their own." The precision with which those words captured her situation made Dolores shift in her chair, a slight discomfort mixed with growing curiosity. "What exactly would this program involve, Dr. Bennett?" "I can't be absent for long periods. We have programs in 6 different schools, and our team is already stretched beyond reasonable limits." 2 days later, to Dolores's complete surprise, Dr. Bennett himself arrived at the small office of Hope in Schools, accompanied by an assistant carrying a meticulously organized folder of documents. The contrast between the renowned doctor, with his impeccable suit and elegant presence, and the modest office with its worn and patched-up furniture seemed to bother him not at all. With impressive patience and eloquence, he personally explained the details of the program as he walked with Dolores through the narrow halls of the organization, occasionally stopping to genuinely observe the various student projects posted on the walls. "Your work in the urban schools of Pennsylvania has inspired generations, Mrs. Jordan," he commented as he examined a mural of thank you letters from former students. "This program was created for people exactly like you, educators who silently transform lives, often at the expense of their own well-being." Every word had been carefully rehearsed with Michael days earlier, calibrated to resonate with Dolores's core values without raising suspicion. When the doctor explained how the treatment schedule would be adapted to accommodate her responsibilities in the organization, Dolores felt her initial resistance beginning to waver. "Dr. Bennett, I must confess, all of this seems almost too good to be true. In my experience, when something seems too good to be true, there's usually some undisclosed condition. What is the true cost of this program? What exactly do you expect from me in exchange for this seemingly miraculous treatment?" As Dolores's initial mistrust of the medical program began to gradually dissipate, other elements of Michael's meticulous plan came into play with choreographed precision. The financial department of Hope in Schools, essentially a tiny room where Dolores and a part-time volunteer accountant organized the organization's meager finances, received an official letter from the newly established Tomorrow's Stars Foundation. The document, printed on professional letterhead, announced that the small NGO had been selected to receive regular quarterly donations as part of an initiative focused on grassroots educational organizations with a disproportionate impact relative to size. The first transfer, already made to the organization's bank account, was modest enough not to raise immediate suspicion, but substantial enough to alleviate the most pressing financial concerns. Simultaneously, a letter in a corporate envelope arrived from one of the country's largest pharmaceutical companies, informing that Dolores Jordan had been nominated by an anonymous medical committee for a compassionate access program that would provide her with essential medications free of charge for an initial period of 2 years. "We must be in the middle of some kind of cosmic alignment," Cassandra commented, genuinely perplexed by the sequence of positive developments as she handed both letters to a visibly skeptical Dolores. "First the treatment program, now regular donations and free medications. Has the universe finally decided to balance the scales after all you've sacrificed?" Dolores examined the documents with growing perplexity, years of constant struggle for resources having cultivated in her a healthy skepticism toward unexpected gifts. "It's as if someone studied exactly what we needed, and has been providing each element at the precise moment. The question is, why? And more importantly, at what cost? The boldest and potentially most problematic part of Michael's orchestrated plan involved introducing a new human element into Dolores's life, something that required meticulous planning and flawless execution. The solution came in the form of Angela Martinez, a carefully selected nonprofit management professional who was thoroughly trained to pose as an old college friend of Dolores. Angela arrived at Hope in Schools on a sunny Thursday afternoon, seemingly by chance, claiming to be in town visiting family and remembering that Dolores ran an organization in the area. The seemingly fortuitous meeting was carefully timed for one of the rare moments when Dolores was not completely overwhelmed with work. "Dolores Jordan, my God, how long has it been? Do you remember me? Angela Martinez, from Professor Fleming's educational sociology class, second year," exclaimed the elegantly dressed woman with perfectly calibrated enthusiasm, neither excessive enough to seem fake, nor restrained enough to seem calculated. Dolores, momentarily disoriented by the familiarity with which the stranger approached her, dug into her memory to find an Angela Martinez she may have known decades ago. The old friend skillfully filled in the blanks with vague enough details to be plausible, but specific enough to create an illusion of shared connection. "You probably don't remember me. I was that quiet girl who always sat in the back and almost never spoke in group discussions. But I never forgot your speech on educational inequality at the spring symposium. It's what inspired me to pursue a career in nonprofit management, though I took a much more corporate path than yours." In the following weeks, Angela, coincidentally, reappeared several times, gradually building a relationship of trust with Dolores through conversations about education, philanthropy, and organizational management challenges. At each meeting, she strategically shared more details about her own life, how she had spent years working in a corporate foundation, married to a financial executive, and recently widowed. Then, during a specially planned lunch, Angela finally revealed the true purpose of her presence. "Dolores, I need to be completely honest with you. It wasn't a coincidence that I showed up here that day. After Thomas passed away, leaving me a significant inheritance, I spent months reflecting on how to honor his memory in a meaningful way. I hired a research firm to identify high-impact educational organizations led by women in vulnerable communities." She paused dramatically, carefully calculated to seem emotionally genuine. "Your name was the first on the list, and when I discovered it was the same Dolores Jordan who inspired me years ago in college, I felt it was some sort of sign. I'm searching for purpose, Dolores, and I want to invest not just money, but my experience in financial management into your work. I'd like to offer to manage the financial side of the organization, allowing you to focus exclusively on your inspiring work with the students, especially now while you're going through this medical treatment." Dolores's penetrating gaze studied Angela's face, searching for any signs of manipulation or falseness, while her analytical mind tried to connect all these seemingly unrelated developments in her life. "Angela, I appreciate your offer, but I need to ask, how exactly did you know about my medical treatment? This information is not public knowledge." As the overlapping layers of Michael's plan began to intertwine in Dolores's life, another discrete aspect of the operation was underway. Overdue medical bills, late mortgages, credit cards with exorbitant interest accumulated over years of prioritizing the needs of the organization over personal ones, all began to be systematically paid off through a supposedly legitimate medical debt forgiveness fund, structured as a partnership between hospitals and financial institutions to alleviate the burden on educators with chronic conditions. The financial engineering was impressive in its complexity and meticulous in its execution. Each payment carefully processed through channels that would appear completely legitimate under scrutiny, each communication crafted to seem like part of a broader social initiative rather than assistance specifically directed at Dolores. When she received the first notification that one of her largest medical debts had been selected for total forgiveness as a part of a philanthropic initiative, her initial reaction was pure disbelief. "There must be some mistake," she insisted to the representative on the phone, her voice reflecting the tension of someone who had learned the hard way to be wary of easy solutions. "I didn't sign up for any debt forgiveness program." The representative's response, A bank employee completely unaware of the true origin of the initiative was reassuringly routine. Ms. Jordan, there is no need to apply. Your situation was identified through algorithms that analyze significant medical debt cases affecting professionals in essential community service sectors. The program is specifically designed for people like you, individuals whose work benefits entire communities but who face financial difficulties due to health conditions. I can assure you it is completely legitimate and you have no further obligation. Nearly 2,000 miles away, in a discreetly luxurious hotel suite in Vancouver, chosen precisely because no one would expect to find him there, Michael Jordan received daily updates on the progress of the Phoenix Project. The Canadian city provided the anonymity necessary to monitor the situation without risk of accidental encounters with family members or acquaintances, and the different time zone allowed him to keep his communications with a small team at times that wouldn't raise suspicions. Each report was meticulously analyzed, every detail scrutinized with the same obsessive intensity that had made him legendary on the basketball court. Marcus Williams, through encrypted communications, provided updates on the financial progress of the operation. Dr. Westmoreland reported daily on Dolores' medical condition, translating complex clinical terminology into straightforward assessments that Michael could understand. David Falk oversaw the intricate legal aspects, ensuring that every move remained completely undetectable. Mr. Jordan, we have significant progress to report, began the video conference on that particular morning, with the three advisors connected simultaneously on separate screens. Your sister has finally scheduled her first full consultation in the treatment program for next Monday. The medical team is fully prepared with her complete medical history, every detail personally reviewed by Dr. Bennett. The preliminary analysis suggests that, with the proper protocol, we can expect significant improvements in her condition within 6 to 8 weeks. Michael nodded silently, absorbing the information with an impassive expression that masked the emotional storm inside. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the meticulously orchestrated plan produced tangible results that went beyond even the most optimistic expectations of the team. Regular medical updates confirmed that Dolores was finally receiving the comprehensive treatment her condition required. Proper medication in the correct dosages, specialized physical therapy, nutritional monitoring, and the crucial psychological support to cope with the chronic stress exacerbating her symptoms. Simultaneously, the Tomorrow Stars Foundation provided stable financial flow for the organization, enabling the hiring of additional staff that relieved some of the overwhelming workload on Dolores. Angela Martinez, performing her role with impressive precision, gradually took on administrative and financial responsibilities, creating space for Dolores to focus on areas where her impact was most significant: direct interaction with students, developing educational programs, and mentoring young community leaders. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Week after week, discrete photographic reports showed Dolores gradually regaining weight, color, and that magnetic energy that had always defined her. In his hotel room in Vancouver, Michael studied each image with silent intensity, noticing every sign of improvement: the way she now walked without the visible effort he had previously witnessed, how her gestures regained their natural fluidity, how the sparkle gradually returned to her eyes. "It's almost miraculous," Dr. Westmoreland commented during a particularly positive update. "The last set of tests shows a significant reduction in inflammatory markers. With the right medication and a reduction in extreme physical stress, her body is finally getting the chance to recover. Your sister has responded to the treatment beyond initial expectations. There is an extraordinary resilience in her physical constitution, something she likely shares with you, Mr. Jordan." On a particularly significant night, 3 months into the operation, Michael received the news he had been waiting for. Dolores had completed her first full cycle of treatment, and the preliminary results exceeded even the medical team's most optimistic projections. Her condition, though still requiring continuous monitoring and regular medication, was officially classified as in controlled remission, the first critical step toward sustainable recovery. The latest photographs showed her teaching a science class at one of the downtown schools, her face animated and expressive, without the evident signs of pain and exhaustion that had previously dominated her appearance. The report detailed how she had, for for the first time in over a year, climbed a full flight of stairs without pausing to catch her breath or leaning on the railing due to joint pain. In his hotel room, alone with this transformative news, Michael Jordan, the man who had built his legend by maintaining absolute control over his emotions, finally allowed the facade to crumble completely. Kneeling silently beside the bed, this global icon lowered his head in silent gratitude, tears streaming freely down his face as decades of shared memories with his sister flooded his consciousness. "Thank you," he whispered repeatedly, his words directed not to any specific divine entity, but to any force in the universe that had allowed his plan to succeed, that had given his sister a second chance. "She deserves this more than anyone I've ever met. She deserves every moment of relief, every opportunity to continue her work without sacrificing her own life in the process." Spring in Philadelphia brought with it the promise of renewal, a symbolism not lost on Dolores Jordan as she walked down the hallway of the renovated headquarters of Hope in Schools. 3 months of consistent medical treatment had transformed not only her physical appearance, but also restored the vibrant energy that had always defined her before the illness. Her cheeks, once hollowed out from weight loss, were regaining their healthy fullness. Her sluggish walk had given way to firm and decisive steps, and her eyes, once constantly clouded by chronic pain, now shone with the clarity and insight that her students and colleagues had always admired. The organization she had built through years of personal sacrifice now operated with a financial stability it had never experienced. Additional staff eased her workload, regular donations ensured the continuation of programs, and the professional management by Angela Martinez had eliminated the constant crises that had previously consumed her sleepless nights. As she checked messages on her new computer, part of the technological updates provided by a modernization program for educational organizations, Dolores found herself reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events from the past few months. "I still can't fully process how everything changed so quickly," she remarked to Angela, who was organizing financial reports at the desk beside her. "It's as if some secret benefactor had been watching every challenge we faced and designed specific solutions for each one. Part of me feels deeply grateful, but another part, the part that grew suspicious of anything that seems too good to be true, can't stop looking for what the real cost of all this is." The seed of discovery was innocently planted during a routine meeting with the board of the Inspiring Educators Foundation, which was funding her medical treatment. Dolores, always meticulous in her research, had requested additional documentation on the organizational structure of the foundation to include in a transparency report for her own donors. The packet of documents arrived in a sleek navy blue envelope with the foundation's discreet logo, containing annual reports, biographies of board members, and a series of signed forms approving her participation in the treatment program. It was on one of these forms, on the last page of a particularly dense document, that Dolores noticed something that made her heart race instantly: a digital signature in the bottom right corner, not the name itself, carefully obscured with a generic title of Executive Director, but the distinctive way the strokes connected, the characteristic slant, the unique pressure applied at certain points. Dolores knew that signature intimately, having seen it on dozens of letters over decades, from the first university contracts to global sponsorship documents. The particular way Michael Jordan signed his documents was practically a calligraphic fingerprint, impossible to confuse for someone who had grown up watching it evolve from adolescence to adulthood. "Impossible," she whispered, instinctively tracing the outline of the signature with the tip of her finger. Or maybe, perfectly possible. Typical of him to find a way to help without anyone knowing, especially me. In the days that followed, Dolores embarked on a quiet and methodical investigation, applying the same analytical skills she used to develop educational curricula. With newly acquired access to resources that had previously been beyond her reach, she traced connections between the various organizations that had mysteriously appeared in her life over the past few months. Each discovery revealed another layer of the complex web of anonymous support. Directors with professional backgrounds linked to companies in which Michael held minority stakes. Offices registered at addresses connected to subsidiary holdings of his companies. specific legal formulations in the documents she recognized from previous family contracts. The Stars of Tomorrow Foundation, the Compassionate Access Program for medications, the Medical Debt Forgiveness Fund, and even Angela Martinez's supposed inheritance. All paths, when followed with enough persistence, converge to the same source. The extent and complexity of the plan left her both impressed and perplexed. She set up an entire operation, multiple organizations, real people with legitimate qualifications, all to help me without me knowing, she murmured to herself as she organized her findings into a black folder. It must have cost millions, involved dozens of people, all meticulously orchestrated like one of his legendary plays in the NBA Finals. The same brother I used to help with homework put together a plan more elaborate than any game strategy he ever executed on the court. Instead of confronting Michael by phone or exposing her findings to others, Dolores made a characteristically direct decision. On a Friday, without announcing her visit or alerting mutual family members, she boarded a flight to Charlotte, the folder of evidence securely held in her hands throughout the journey. The taxi dropped her off in front of the exclusive residential complex where Michael kept his main residence, an impressive property, yet surprisingly discreet given the global stature of its owner. After identifying herself at the security booth, Dolores was escorted through the gates and along the winding path leading to the mansion. The afternoon was advancing into dusk, painting the North Carolina sky in golden and purple hues, reminiscent of the Chicago Bulls' colors, the team her brother had transformed into a dynasty. As she walked to the front door, Dolores felt a strange mix of nervousness and determination, sensations she rarely experienced in her interactions with the brother who, despite his global fame, had always been simply Mike to her. Her delicate, deliberate steps on the stone pathway marked an almost meditative rhythm as she mentally rehearsed the questions she needed to ask, the answers she needed to hear. All my life I've cared for him and others, always knew exactly what to say and how to act. So why then are my hands trembling now? Not from physical weakness, but from something deeper, as if we're about to redefine something fundamental in our relationship that has remained unchanged since childhood. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the interior of the house, followed by moments of anticipatory silence. When the door finally opened, Michael Jordan appeared dressed casually, dark jeans and a gray polo shirt, as far from the public image of the impeccably dressed billionaire as possible. For a brief moment, his expression registered pure surprise, quickly replaced by a genuine smile upon recognizing his sister. Then almost instantly, that joy transformed into something more complex as his eyes noticed the folder firmly held against Dolores's chest and the evident determination in her posture. Years of psychological duels on the court had sharpened his ability to instantly read others' intentions. Michael's face broke into a knowing expression that dispensed with any preliminary explanations, as if he already knew exactly the reason for her unexpected visit. "How long did you know?" he asked softly, before Dolores had a chance to utter a single word. There was no defensiveness in his voice, only a calm acceptance, almost as if he had anticipated this moment from the very beginning. Those 5 words confirmed all of Dolores' suspicions. It wasn't a question about what she had discovered, but about when she had discovered it. The implicit admission hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meanings that only siblings with decades of shared history could fully understand. "Enough," Dolores finally replied, silent tears beginning to streak down her cheeks without her making any effort to stop or hide them. They were not tears of anger or disappointment, but of something much deeper and more nuanced. Gratitude mixed with a particular sadness that they had both arrived at a point where such elaborate dissimulation had become necessary between siblings who once shared everything. The folder in her arms contained meticulously organized documents, evidence carefully gathered, typical of her methodical nature even in the face of strong emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" she continued, her voice surprisingly firm despite the tears now flowing freely. "Why all this elaborate theater, these fictional foundations, these people hired to play roles? I'm your sister, Michael, the same person who took care of you when mom worked double shifts, who defended you when the coaches didn't believe in your potential, who saved every newspaper clipping about you since your first game in high school. Why couldn't you just say, Dolores, you need help, and I want to give it to you? When did we become strangers who need intermediaries and shell corporations to communicate love and concern? Michael took a step to the side, inviting Dolores in with a gentle gesture. Without words, he led her through the wide entry hall, past the trophy room cataloging his legendary career, until they arrived at his private library, a personal sanctuary of dark-paneled walls where he rarely received visitors, even close family. This was the space where Michael truly lived and thought, far from the more ostentatious areas of the mansion designed to impress corporate guests and celebrities. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves housed not only books on business and sports, as many might expect, but also surprisingly diverse volumes on history, philosophy, and classic literature. Intellectual interests Michael privately cultivated, away from the eyes of the public who primarily knew him as an athlete and businessman. Family photographs took center stage, not the official poses with famous figures that adorned other parts of the house, but intimate snapshots capturing ordinary moments. Dolores and Michael as teenagers sitting on the porch steps of the family home in Wilmington, their father James teaching him how to change the car oil, their mother Dolores Sr. in the kitchen, surrounded by all the children during a Sunday dinner. It was a space that revealed the man behind the myth, the brother instead of the global icon. Because you would have refused, he finally replied, his voice thick with emotion, rarely displayed. Because you're exactly like our mother, putting everyone ahead of yourself until there's nothing left for you. I knew you would reject any direct offer of help, insist that you were fine, keep sacrificing your health for others. So I had to create a system where you could accept help without feeling like you were being treated as a charity case, especially by family. The silence that followed was laden with decades of family dynamics, of patterns established in childhood that had stretched into adulthood. Dolores slowly walked around the library, running her fingers along the carefully organized books, observing details that revealed the brother who existed beyond the public image. Books with handwritten notes in the margins, photographs rarely seen by the media, mementos from significant moments the world didn't know about. Finally, she placed the folder on the central table and sat in one of the leather armchairs, inviting Michael to do the same with a simple gesture. When he settled across from her, Dolores opened the folder and pulled out a specific medical document that wasn't part of her evidence against him, but something much more personal and devastating. My doctor told me just a few months ago that I had at most a year to live if I continued without proper treatment, she revealed, sliding the medical prognosis across the polished table. This disease, combined with untreated rheumatoid arthritis, complicated by chronic exhaustion and poor nutrition, a slow-motion death sentence. I knew exactly what was happening with my body, Michael. It wasn't ignorance that kept me from seeking treatment. Dolores paused, gathering strength for the confession she had never planned to share with any family member. It was a conscious choice. I calculated how much time I had left and decided I would use every day, every penny, every ounce of energy to make sure our school program survived. Those kids don't have anyone else, Mike. If our mentorship programs disappeared, who would be there to intervene when gangs recruit at school gates? Who would help with college applications when school counselors have 400 students each? Who would celebrate their achievements when many don't have functional families to do so? Michael's expression shifted from empathetic understanding to something rarely seen even by those closest to him, pure, unfiltered vulnerability. The man who had built a career in public persona based on absolute control, who never showed weakness in front of adversaries, was now allowing uncontrollable tears to roll freely down his face. "And me?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "And our family?" "The world needs you, Dolores. I need you." The tremor in his voice emphasized the word "I" in a way that revealed decades of emotional dependency rarely acknowledged between them. "Do you think I don't know what you mean to me? To all of us? Who do you think taught me that hard work beats natural talent? Who stayed up late reviewing my essays when I was exhausted after practice? Who constantly reminded me that height, speed, and skill mean nothing without integrity and purpose?" Michael stood abruptly, walking to a specific shelf and pulling out a leather-bound photo album, apparently worn from frequent handling. Opening it to a marked page, he showed a photograph of Dolores as a teenager, holding an academic trophy, while Michael, still a child, looked on with obvious admiration. This was the first time I understood what true excellence meant. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about you setting a standard for yourself that didn't depend on external validation. Before the Chicago Bulls, before Jumpman, before any contract or championship, you were my first definition of greatness. The conversation stretched through the night, hours passing unnoticed as decades of shared and separate experiences were finally articulated. The library, illuminated only by strategically placed lamps that created an intimate atmosphere, became a confessional for long unsaid truths. Occasionally, one of them would get up to serve water or coffee, or to fetch a photograph or object that provided tangible context to a particular memory. At one especially revealing moment, Michael admitted something he had never shared in any interview or authorized biography. "You know what's the strangest thing about everything I've achieved?" he asked, contemplating the distorted reflection in the dark surface of his coffee. "Winning championships, breaking records, building global brands. None of it has ever brought me the peace I see in your eyes when you work with those kids. That moment of pure satisfaction you experience when one of your students understands a difficult concept, or when a troubled child finally trusts you enough to share what's really going on at home. I've never experienced anything like that on the courts or in boardrooms." Michael paused, carefully choosing his next words. "I built an identity around being the best, never showing weakness, turning every challenge into fuel to dominate opponents. It worked extraordinarily well for basketball and business, but left a void that no trophy or bank account can fill. Sometimes I watch you working. Yes, I checked on you regularly even before I knew about your condition. And I see a kind of fulfillment that's always eluded me." Dolores listened attentively to her brother's confession, recognizing the rare vulnerability in the man the world knew for his relentless, competitive toughness. After a contemplative moment, she adjusted herself in her chair, offering a smile that blended wisdom with self-deprecation. "Maybe both of us took our respective journeys to unsustainable extremes," she reflected, tracing the pattern of the leather chair with her fingers. "You built walls so high around yourself that few can really reach you. I poured so much of myself into others that there's almost nothing left to sustain my own body and mind. They're opposite extremes of the same drive, don't you think? That absolute determination Mom and Dad instilled in us from a young age." Dolores paused, considering a new perspective that treatment and forced rest had provided. "I'm starting to realize that maybe I took my spirit of sacrifice too far. That dying for a cause, even one as worthy as those kids, doesn't necessarily serve it better than living for it in a sustainable way. I remember watching you play with 103-degree Fahrenheit fever in the finals and thinking, this is how it's done. This is how you show absolute commitment. But now I wonder if we both confuse self-destruction with dedication, if we inherited this tendency to work until we break as if it were a virtue, when it might just be another form of imbalance." As the night stretched into the early hours of the morning, the dynamic between the siblings gradually took on a quality reminiscent of their adolescence. Before fame, before the complications celebrity brought to their interactions. The layers of defenses carefully built over decades to navigate their respective worlds began to dissolve, revealing the Jordans who existed beneath the labels of basketball legend and dedicated educator. At one particularly significant moment, as they looked together at an old family photograph taken after a high school basketball game, Michael smiled with a nostalgia rarely expressed publicly. "Remember what Dad always used to say?" he asked, his finger tracing the image of James Jordan, whose murder years earlier had left a deep emotional scar across the family. The question hung in the air for a moment, loaded with the almost tangible presence of the patriarch whose wisdom continued to guide them even decades after his passing. "The greatest assists are the ones no one sees," Michael continued, quoting one of the many practical aphorisms through which his father communicated deep lessons, disguised as advice about basketball. Those words, rarely shared in interviews or biographies, were part of the family's private legacy, personal philosophy passed through generations, shaping core values without the need for grand proclamations. At the mention of her father's words, Dolores's face lit up with immediate recognition, as if an electrical connection had been completed. The quote triggered a wave of shared memories. Sunday afternoons with James Jordan at the small makeshift court, in the backyard of Wilmington, teaching the children not only game techniques but life lessons that transcended the sport. And the most important ones are the ones that keep the team strong, she instinctively completed, smiling through the tears that had now returned, but with a different quality, not of sadness or frustration, but of recognition and acceptance. The full phrase, rarely heard outside the intimate family circle, encapsulated the philosophy that had shaped them both in distinct but deeply parallel ways. Michael had interpreted the lesson by standing out individually while elevating his teammates to higher levels. Dolores had applied it by dedicating herself to strengthening entire communities, often at the cost of personal recognition. In that moment of mutual understanding, something fundamental was silently renegotiated between them. A new unspoken contract that honored their separate journeys while acknowledging the common source of their respective determinations. Truth, as it often does, found its way into the public eye in an unexpected manner. An investigative journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer, intrigued by the sudden transformations in the small organization, Hope in Schools, began tracing connections between the various foundations that had suddenly taken an interest in Dolores Jordan's work. Weeks of meticulous investigation revealed patterns impossible to ignore: financial ties, shared directors, and a web of entities that, when mapped visually, formed an intricate support system, all pointing in the same direction. The front-page article, titled "The Greatest Assist of Michael Jordan," included a blurry but unmistakable photograph captured by a patient at the University of Pennsylvania hospital. Michael, wearing a cap and sunglasses, discreetly visiting the floor where Dolores was receiving treatment. The image, though unclear, showed the unmistakable profile of the basketball icon, talking intently with doctors in the hallway, out of his sister's view. The article detailed the extensive plan created to help Dolores without compromising her dignity or autonomy, describing it as possibly the most complex and personal act of philanthropy ever carried out by a celebrity, not for publicity or image benefit, but for the most fundamental reason: brotherly love. The phones in Michael and Dolores's offices did not stop ringing in the 48 hours following the publication. Press agents, television producers, charity executives, and even the White House sought comments on the story that had captured the national imagination. After a long private conversation, the Jordan siblings made a decision that surprised their respective inner circles. Instead of minimizing the situation or managing it as a public relations crisis, they would fully embrace the truth, turning a personal story into an opportunity for a broader impact. In a joint press conference held in the main auditorium of Hope in Schools, with dozens of students and educators present alongside the press, Michael and Dolores sat side by side on a simple stage. The absence of corporate logos, promotional banners, or any marketing paraphernalia starkly contrasted with the usual events associated with the Jordan name. Michael, wearing a conservative gray suit instead of his usual designer clothes, announced the official creation of the Jordan Support Circle Foundation, dedicated specifically to supporting community leaders facing health crises. This foundation was not born from a marketing strategy or business plan, he explained, his voice carrying an emotion rarely shown in public. It was born out of the real need of a community leader who happens to be my sister, and the realization that there are thousands like her sacrificing their health and well-being to serve others. When it was her turn to speak, Dolores stood with the strength and presence that so inspired her students. For a long time, we thought that strength meant facing everything alone, she said, her voice firm and clear again, with no trace of the fragility that had once characterized her. Both my brother and I, in different ways, built identities around being the strong ones, the unshakable ones, those that others could count on to never give in or show vulnerability. She paused, smiling softly at Michael. Today, I understand that true strength is knowing when we need each other, that allowing oneself to be helped does not diminish your ability to help others. In fact, it multiplies it. The simplicity and sincerity of her words resonated through the silent room, where veteran journalists, typically cynical, found themselves surprisingly moved by the authenticity of the moment, something rarely witnessed in carefully choreographed corporate events. Michael, sitting beside her, added, "My sister taught me that true champions don't always wear trophies or medals. Sometimes they carry clipboards in classrooms or serve soup in shelters." His words, free from the polished neutrality that typically characterized his press conferences, carried the authenticity of a personal truth experienced. I spent decades building a brand based on individual excellence, on never showing weakness. But what I witnessed through Dolores' journey taught me that there is a form of strength that doesn't involve dominating opponents or breaking records. It involves sustaining others even when no one is watching, even when there are no applause or sponsorship contracts. The vulnerability shown by the notoriously reserved cultural icon gave the story a dimension that transcended the usual interest in celebrities, touching something more fundamental about human values and priorities. In the following months, the Jordan siblings story inspired a wave of similar initiatives around the world. Celebrities from various fields began to silently support community workers, often without public announcements or expectations of recognition. Corporations, recognizing both the value of public relations and genuine human impact, created health programs specifically for educators and social workers. A Hollywood producer announced a documentary series highlighting invisible heroes, ordinary people doing extraordinary work in underserved communities, often at the expense of their own well-being. More significantly, lawmakers in several states proposed bills to expand medical support for educators and social workers. Some explicitly named the Dolores Jordan Initiative, recognizing her story as a catalyst for political change. 1 year after the press conference, Dolores was fully recovered, her energy and magnetic presence completely restored. The Jordan Support Circle Foundation had already assisted more than 200 educators and community workers with serious medical conditions, allowing them to continue their vital work while receiving proper treatment. In a special event at the West Philadelphia school where Michael had secretly witnessed Dolores' lecture while she was ill, hundreds of people gathered to celebrate not only her recovery, but the expanded legacy that had emerged from her personal experience. The auditorium, now renovated thanks to funds from the new foundation, was filled with educators who had received assistance, students whose lives had been transformed, and families who had found hope through her work. One by one, they took the stage to share stories of how Dolores and the program she had created had changed their paths in fundamental ways. Michael and Dolores, deliberately not switching their usual positions, sat quietly at the back of the auditorium, away from the spotlight, watching people share their stories. In that anonymous space, they witnessed the true power of their family legacy, manifesting in ways that transcended any individual achievement, transformed lives, strengthened communities, hope restored in places where there had previously been only resignation. "You know what I learned from all of this?" Dolores asked softly, her voice almost inaudible under the applause for a young speaker who had just described how her educational programs had saved him from a life on the streets. Michael turned slightly toward her, his face expressing genuine curiosity. "What?" he replied, his voice equally low. "That sometimes the greatest acts of love are invisible to the world, but they change everything for those who receive them," Dolores replied, her hand finding his in the space between their chairs. Michael smiled, gently squeezing his sister's hand in a rare public display of affectionate tenderness. "And that even the strongest of us need a team," he added, the words carrying the weight of a lesson hard-learned over decades of believing that strength meant isolation and self-sufficiency. Together, they remained seated, no longer as global icon and dedicated social worker, but simply as brother and sister, united by a legacy of love that transcended fame and fortune. A legacy that now inspired millions to care for one another with the same quiet and transformative fervor their parents had taught them years ago in the modest streets of Wilmington. Did you enjoy the story of Michael Jordan and Dolores Jordan? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and don't miss the next video that's already waiting for you on the screen. I'll see you there. Oh, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought of the ending of this story.